Let's talk about how you can minimize your stress and anxiety by microdosing. With microdosing interest on the rise, we all ought to understand what the potential of this plant can be for us and how can it potentially benefit us too. I've helped many professionals, successful people that feel burned out figure out how to minimize their stress and anxiety by microdosing, and today I want to show you how you can too. My first tip on how you can minimize your stress and anxiety by microdosing is we ought to know what microdosing even is. Simply put, microdosing means that you can take any variety of a drug at a very small portion, smaller than your typical serving size. While this term can be applied to a various amount of substances, the mainstream conversation that we're having about microdosing typically refers to LSD and medicinal mushrooms. However, you can also microdose cannabis, which is becoming more and more legal in every state in the United States and across the world. Folks who take their microdoses take them in such a small amount that they're virtually undetectable. Your lifestyle doesn't change much. Then, on the other hand, there's a reference to macrodosing, which means that you take a larger amount of it. There's value in both sides. Typically, individuals that are hesitant to try this plant medicine would benefit most from microdosing. Microdosing allows them to just take little step-by-step amounts until they feel more comfortable with a larger amount, if they ever want to go there. Macrodosing, on the other hand, is you jumping into another feeling, reality, or dimension where things that typically don't move in this reality, this 3D space that we have, may start changing and morphing. You may have sounds that you can see and colors that you can hear. All the different senses start changing. However, a microdose, you do not feel that. Which brings me to my next tip. What is the difference of microdosing and a full trip? To understand how this works, you have to understand how psychedelics affect the mind. LSD and psilocybin medicinal mushrooms, oftentimes in the larger trips, the macrodoses, are life-altering experiences. Those who have experimented with these psychedelics, both recreationally and in controlled settings, have shared that they have experiences of euphoria and changes in their regular reality that I had mentioned before. And science has an answer why this takes effect on people. They work on a part of the brain known as the parahippocampal retrosplenial cortical network, which is thought to play into our sense of self and our ego. When you take psychedelics, it loosens up the ego, that sense that's holding you back and talking to you, your self-talk that you have. And you allow yourself to feel more connected, not just with the people that you're surrounded by, but also with the environment, the nature aspects too. Those who typically microdose don't have all those senses where they feel like they had a spiritual or mystical awakening or an altered state of reality. However, some do report small changes in their perception and their state of mind, where they can feel happier, more confident, more clear-minded to make sounder judgments. More or less, when you take a microdose, you take a lot less of a dose than a full-on trip, so you don't feel all those sense changes like you do for a macrodose. So in other words, a microdose is going to give you a less sensational feeling than a full-on trip that you would experience. The amount that you take during a microdose is supposed to be so small that you don't even feel the intoxicating effects of it like you do for a trip, a full-on trip. Rather, people come into a microdose experience with the intention of having better moods, clearer mind, mental clarity, and creativity and energy levels increase from it too. Microdosing is nothing new. It comes from the pharmaceutical world, as when they create a new drug, they have to test it out on individuals in small doses until they can understand what the scientific effects that has on our bodies. And they slowly increase it to see if you either get a tolerance to it or if you need more of it to actually make it function for you. Some researchers or even psychonauts are contemplating on what the effects of this plant medicine could do for us. Like the author Mark Grober, who wrote An End to Upside Down Thinking. He says that this could play a huge effect into how we understand how the mind works. It's a much more subtle effect, yeah, but people report things like being less anxious and more creative. Now, before I move on to the next tip, and if you're an experienced microdoser that wants to learn how you can microdose to manifest more, I have a free guide for you that you can find in the description box. Just click on that link and you'll be able to download the free guide on how you can microdose to manifest successfully. This guide will show you how you can microdose successfully on your own, even though I always highly recommend using a coach or a mentor like myself to be your buddy alongside your process, even if it's 5-10 times down the line. Anyone can microdose. Anyone is allowed to manifest on their own, but having someone that can guide you to spearhead to get you where you need to go faster, that'll save you so much more time and energy trying to figure it out on your own. Microdose coaches and mentors are there to help aid your success. There, I will also share with you how you can find your own resources, the best methods that I use on all my clients, as well as best practices for you to be able to safely go on your own journey. Again, make sure to click on the link in my description box for your own guide on microdosing. Now that we have that out of the way, let's move on to the next tip on how you can ease your stress and anxiety by microdosing. So you want to know what the benefits of microdosing are? In a small survey of about 278 people who microdosed, reported these benefits. They improved mood, lowered anxiety, clearer thinking abilities, more focus and motivation, as well as an increase in both divergent and convergent thinking. Those are two forms of thinking associated with creativity and problem solving. And another psychonaut shares with us that it sharpens all of your senses. And it's as if all the frequencies of your atoms and energy field are raised a little bit higher, making you more conscious. There has been a limited amount of adverse reportings on people who've used larger than microdose amounts that I need to share with you too, just so that you're aware. However, when you reflect on these, make sure that you are aware that these are all instances that are happening while in the trip, not afterwards. So there's problems paying attention, obviously with all the different colors and cartoonish feelings that you're having going around you. It'll definitely make it hard for you to pay attention to one thing. There's problems thinking clearly, like a brain fog, because all your neurons inside your brain are going off at the same time, making new connections. Of course, you're not going to think the most clearest. You definitely don't want to make a presentation while doing mushrooms. In effect, though, it can also cause you to have more anxiety, because as you're going into that higher, deeper trip, it's an altered sense of reality. You don't know what's happening around you, and it can make you feel a little panicky if you've never done it before. There's also appetite changes. You most likely will not feel hungry. Even though there are rare cases that people do feel hungry. I don't know why, I am one of them. And your stomach can get upset. However, there is a way to combat that by lemon teching, which is another video I'll share. So make sure to check it out on my YouTube channel. But it is a fungus. This plant is going to make you not feel the best in your stomach, for sure. But by lemon teching, that'll eliminate that feeling for you. And of course, being in a social setting, it may be difficult for you to communicate with these people, especially if they are not on a trip as well. So again, I want to remind you, these are all adverse effects that are potentially going to happen if you are in a deeper trip, a lot bigger than a microdose. In the short term, at least, we haven't seen any potential dangers or risks associated with microdosing. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't any risks associated with the process. The biggest risk is that if an individual decides to take a microdose, it is still an illegal drug federally. It's always best to work with a plant medicine advisor like myself, who can offer you some hands-on guidance and one-on-one support. So the next tip I have for you to minimize your stress and anxiety with microdosing is, how can you microdose on your own? There's no concrete evidence that's supporting one schedule method of microdosing over another. There's some people that take a microdose every 3 days. Some people take it on a weekly instance. Others take it on a monthly basis, or sometimes even just once a year. For best results, consider hiring a coach or a microdose mentor like myself, who can offer you the support and guidance so that you have the confidence in using this plant on your own, even eventually. And you can 10x your results so that you're not tinkering around in this world on your own. Moving on to the next tip for you for easing your anxiety and stress by microdosing. How can you safely source your own? Well, my greatest hack at that is to grow your own, because technically all the individual products that you'll need to make the actual mushroom grow are legal. There is a gray wall that you hit once you start combining everything to be able to actually grow the mushrooms, but there are a lot of cities in the United States that have decriminalized medicinal mushrooms. So there isn't that big of a risk anymore. Another risk associated with taking any kind of form of microdosing is that you could accidentally take a little bit too much, more than you intended to. Because when you take this plant medicine, you take a little bit, and it takes some time to actually onset, to start feeling the effects or any kind of changes, especially if you're microdosing. It's so subtle you won't feel it, right? So you want to take a little bit more. And then if you take too much, it's not possible for you to go back. So it's a little risky if you do this on your own. Even doctors and psychologists and therapists who are really excited about this potential of this plant medicine always recommend having a buddy. Use the buddy system. You can't jump on a plane and try to fly the plane on your own if you've never flown a plane before. So it's always advisable to get a co-pilot to give you some guidance on where you need to go. I can be your co-pilot, and you can find me on all my social media channels, and you can reach out to me and we together can discover what is the best self journey for you to partake in.